In May, Governor Scott Walker announced that for the second year in a row, the state would defer on making payments totaling $101 million toward Wisconsin's $45 billion debt. What measures should be taken to address the state's growing debt?
Well, number one, stop borrowing. When your boat's leaking, the last thing you want to do is keep drilling holes in the boat. The state's got to stop borrowing. That means we've got to stop spending. We can't continue to spend at the rate we're spending, bring in revenue at the rate we're bringing in revenue, and expect the debt to go away. It doesn't work that way. That should be very clear. The problem is when you get into office and you have so many different constituents all coming at you with different needs and wants and desires, it becomes really hard to say no to somebody. I applaud my opponent for standing to someone and saying, I'm sorry I disappointed you with my vote, but I had to vote the way I think the most people in the district want me to vote. That's good. It's rare to find that kind of thing in public office, because usually people will try to excuse away how they voted or try to tell somebody they don't know what they do know. The fact is, we're spending more than we're taking in. And if we're going to keep spending more than we're going to keep taking in, the only way we can do is either take in more or borrow more. If we borrow more, we can't keep paying the debt that way. If we take in more, then what we're going to do is we're going to tax people, and we're going to see the economy getting even more sluggish and even come to a complete standstill. So the only way we're going to be able to pay off the debt, and this is just the same way that you or I would have to do in our household. When you owe more than you're bringing in, you have to stop spending, and you have to cut back, you have to pay off the debt. Otherwise, you have to increase the revenue. The only way to increase revenue is to raise taxes, and I don't think that's a good thing to do in this economy.
Wow. Second year in a row that we deferred over $100 million in payments. Wonder why we did that. I'll tell you why. It's so that we look good as a government. It's so that we could get this latest report that says we have an $85 million surplus. Maybe, final results aren't in, this year. No, that doesn't work. We need to pay that debt, and I would not have supported doing that. But let's talk about what David says we need to do, which is to spend less. I was the only one, Republican or Democrat, that voted against a whole bunch of legislation that passed in the last 2 days of the Assembly. Go check. $1.5 million for public schools, and $1.5 million for broadband, $1.5 million for something. There were a lot of them. There was a little more that went into aged care. I voted against every one of those bills. And in committee, I fought against them. And I fought against them because I said, we don't have this money. Oh, yes. I said, we just got a report that we were $176 million in a hole, and that's after deferring over $100 million last year. We don't have this money. But I was the only voice because it supposedly, I think, makes incumbents look good because we threw a few bucks at public schools and we threw a few bucks at health. $2 per student, by the way, in the state of Wisconsin. That does nothing. And it was a waste of our money, and it was us overspending. But I was the only voice. If you want a conservative fiscally in the state legislature, send me back. Because I was the only voice that stood up and said, no, I don't care if it makes me look good, this is wrong.
Can I have that? You know, that it's one thing to stand up and say no, but it's another thing to provide a solution. I'm a little confused, I guess, because I hear my opponent talking about single-payer health care, more funding for college, more funding for K through 12 school, more funding for stimulating small businesses and for insurance and for this and for that and the other thing, and yet at the same time he says we're out of money. So I guess my question would be, where do we come up with the money for all that, and how much is enough?
This next question is for Dave, Considine. What do you recommend that Wisconsin do to reduce brain drain when state university students choose to work out of state after graduation?
We provide a place where people want to live. Instead of destroying our DNR funding and the science positions at the DNR, instead of not taking care of our lakes and streams and rivers, instead of allowing millionaires to buy an island so they can tow it away from their private dock and they buy the whole lake and do whatever they want with it, we choose to take care of those things. We choose to continue to have deer hunting be important. And we choose to make a fight against CWD instead of just giving up. We need to get back to the place where people say, hey, this is a place where my rights are respected, my life is taken care of, where state government believes in my welfare and believes that I have rights and I'm going to take care of them, whether they're voting rights, because everybody in the community knows me, but all of a sudden I have to have a voter ID. We make this place a community. I ran on that in the last election. It's why I visited so many places. We need to build community. And as we build community in the state of Wisconsin, instead of alienating each other, people will stay here. People will make jobs here. And they will continue to be here. They're leaving because this is not a place where they want to live.
Well, the question was about brain drain, not whether or not this is a great place to live. Obviously, this is a great place to live. We all live here. Many of us have chosen to live here over other places. We could talk all night about the different philosophies, about the DNR and so forth, but that really has absolutely nothing to do with people getting out of college and going someplace else. It has to do with that being the place where they can go and they can get the jobs. If we do not work to provide an environment wherein businesses can come and establish those jobs, of course, the people are going to go where the jobs are. One thing that has happened in recent legislature, the Wisconsin Rural Initiative, I believe is what it's called, a system or a set of legislation that was introduced by Representative Brooks, Representative Trannell, and a few others. And the idea there was to make sure that in rural areas especially, doctors and educators and people like that that have the advanced education can go and can have the jobs that will pay according to their educational merit, but that also is a place, it provides incentives for those communities and incentives for those people with those jobs to stay in those places. And I'm just beside myself, even having heard his explanation, to figure out why Representative Considine in a rural district would be against the Rural Wisconsin Initiative. The idea of understanding the needs of your district and being able to articulate those needs versus the solutions. I think this is the crux of the matter right here. To say that brain drain is because we have dirty streams, I don't see that at all. I think brain drain is because we don't have jobs. And the reason we don't have jobs is because we aren't doing it legislatively to make it a climate where people will have those jobs.
Rural Initiative. That was one of the things I voted against, by the way. Because again, it was a million here, it was a million there, it was the last 2 days of the assembly, and it was to make us look good. It was a drop in the bucket. Do you realize that what we did for broadband gets broadband across the Wisconsin River one time? That's it. It eats up the whole works. We did nothing. And we do have jobs. Look around, look all over. Jobs are being posted all over the place and we can't find people to fill them. We got jobs.
That's 30 seconds. Next question is for David Moore. These questions, the next three, were posed by readers of the Baraboo News Republic. Baraboo resident Pat Witter asks, in light of the huge cuts to education which have resulted in numerous funding referendums throughout Wisconsin and property tax increases for our citizens, what would you propose to remedy this situation?
I guess I'm not sure what is the question about property taxes or about the cuts to education, or both?
I believe it seems like she's probably getting at the number of referendums that are taking place.
I'll try to hit both in my time. Okay, the referendums and the increased spending, I can't speak for how the public schools spend the money that they get. I'm not on the school board. I know several people that are on the school board, and I'm sure that they do the best with the allotment that they get. This is the time of year when the Sauk County Board does their budget. We just had a presentation this month's meeting where they showed the breakdown of the property tax bill that you get, and about 42% of your property taxes goes towards the public schools. That's in addition to what the state aids are, the federal funding, and so forth. So already, property taxes are maxed just about at every level. They're maxed at the county level, they're maxed at the local level, they're maxed at the school board levies. And so the idea of increasing property taxes, you know, there's a lot we do in the county that we're trying to do so people can stay in their homes, and then we're taxing them right out of their homes. It's somewhat of a headache for myself personally to be able to fight against that. But as far as the fact remains that you still have to have the necessary funding for the schools. And so the referendums that they use is a way to try to get the money that they need for a building or for something like that. And as a society, we have to make some decisions. At some point, as a society, we have to say, are we going to keep pitching in as a society for these common things like schools, or are we going to leave people to their own devices? I think we've already answered that question as a society, that we're going to pitch in. So if we're going to pitch in, then we ought to do it in a responsible way. We ought to do it in a fiscally conscious way. And these referendums that go in, I would just say before anyone votes for them, they probably ought to consider that this is really adding to the burden of property taxes. It's adding to the burden of the other taxes that you pay. At some point, we have to make a decision of when's enough enough. And if I could, just real quick in the remaining time, that's a tough decision to make. But it's a decision that has to be made collectively. It's not a decision that I can make for you or that you can make for me. It's a decision we have to make collectively.
Interesting that in the last section, the question that David addressed to me was, where do we come up with it? And I gave specific answers to this specific question quite a while ago, in talking about rolling back the voucher system, because we can't afford a dual school system. And that will fund it and pay for it. And those who want to go to private schools can still do that. But I think there's more we can do, especially in a rural area. Wisconsin's funding formula is antiquated and ancient and not applicable. And it needs to change. It harms rural schools significantly because the land is not taxed and doesn't have the value, or it looks like it's worth more than it is. And then the funding formula punishes us in rural areas. And so we don't provide equal education to all of the students in the state of Wisconsin. Because if you happen to live in Madison or in Waukesha or in Sheboygan, your schools are pretty good. Because the funding formula fits you. And we have to change that. Restructuring the funding formula is the first and most important thing that we can do. And then I haven't got it fully figured out yet. The second thing we can do is talk about funding education completely. Tommy Thompson started a wonderful thing in both regards to K-12 education and higher education. He said we should pay for 67% of it as a state, and we'll find a way to do it. And he did. And I graduated from college with no debt. Did I work hard? Yeah, I did. But I graduated with absolutely no debt. And a lot of kids did it, and they did it in 4 years. I think the state needs to figure out a way to fund it. You know, Georgia has free K through 14 education. I haven't figured out how they do it yet. I'm going to research that, but they have it, and we need to start doing that while giving local school boards control.